100 Thieves ran out of fuel. It looks like the rocket did actually stop. And J&T, I think we should just discuss to start. Did FlyQuest just outclass them? It was a close but not so close series. It was a 3-0, right?
Yeah, it felt like, I mean, it kind of like felt like the moment we were waiting for, where going into playoffs, obviously 100 Thieves was on a big surge, and FlyQuest, well, they weren't necessarily losing a ton of games. They just weren't looking like their old selves from the first half of the spring split. And the kind of questions going into the series was 100 Thieves going to be able to implement the same game plan against FlyQuest that they have been other teams? And from FlyQuest perspective, are they going to do anything different from their side? One of my problems that I had with FlyQuest for the majority of the second half of Spring Split was the fact that they weren't really innovating too much. It was pretty vanilla and formulaic, their game plan, kind of similar to 100 Thieves. But I think in this series, we saw a big switch up in game plan, primarily putting the ball in Spica's court and allowing him to pretty much do whatever he wanted.
And not just relying on Prince to win the series, right? I think most people, ourselves included, said going into this series it's going to be Prince versus Doublelift, but it was kind of Vikla pogging in this series, which is well, we asked the question, did FlyQuest evolve? And I kind of think yes. I kind of think they did. Seeing as they didn't need to just win through Prince 1v9ing the game, his Vikla's Vagar was nuts. And maybe that champion's broken, but people that listen to us regularly know what I'm going to say. I don't care if it's broken. Anyone can pick it, anyone can ban it. He was nuts on it and just erasing people. And not only was it just like, oh, his cage is OP and his damage is OP, the TP flank on Doublelift and the one play in the top lane too, like he was playing aggro. So I just thought the biggest improvement and the biggest evolution was Vikla this series, especially with the Vagar.
Definitely. You kind of saw FlyQuest play a lot of this series through mid jungle, which is pretty much been the opposite of what they've been doing for the majority of spring. It's either been put all the eggs in the Prince basket, or Impact is doing very well, either playing a good topside matchup or playing very well on the weak side, allowing his team to do a lot more things and just generally having more map impact than the enemy top laner. That's kind of the goal when it comes to Impact. Whenever he's in a playoff series, it's not necessarily about is he going to win or lose the lane. Is he going to have a stronger and more impactful, no pun intended, impact on the map than his opponent? And that was exactly what we saw in the series. It felt like this was the old version of Tenacity instead of this newer Tenacity that we'd been seeing the last couple weeks.
Yeah, and from the 100 Thieves side of things, they still kind of executed their game plan for the most part. Like they still got Doublelift a lot of kills in a lot of the games. It just didn't seem like they were able to close out at all. And so maybe there's some credit to give to 100 Thieves or some criticism to give for FlyQuest, considering 100 Thieves had 2 of the 3 games where they were winning early on. But it doesn't really matter if you're winning early on if you can't close out the game, as Team Liquid learned the hard way this split, right? So um definitely nice to see 100 Thieves look way better when they were just losing like crazy. And yes, I know we had a lot of hope for them coming in because of the 7-game win streak. It just felt like finally they ran into someone that would challenge them at the style of play that they want to play, which is just feed Doublelift, and they were able to execute against it. Spica kept finding ways to get to Doublelift and just not allowing they just didn't allow 100 Thieves to play the game plan that everyone in the world knew that they wanted to play.
Yeah, it was obvious from the beginning of the series that 100 Thieves wanted to do the same things that they've been doing for the last 3 weeks, which included put Dolph on the hyper carry, tank for Tenacity on the weak side, and let's just hope that we can get to the late game and team fight. And while the early games for the most part were fairly even, it wasn't like these Cloud9 or these CLG games that we're seeing where the early game can be so volatile. It was a pretty normal early game state for the whole series. And I think that's something that 100 Thieves probably thought would give them the advantage going, later into the games. But you kind of just saw the team fighting of FlyQuest outperform the team fighting of 100 Thieves. And you mentioned
Mhm.
Spica as well as Impact on the Cassante in a couple of those games, really just being able to get on the back line from the jump and blow up Doublelift in almost every single crucial team fight, especially in that second game, where that second game felt like it was going to be a 100 Thieves win. A lot of it had to do with them having the soul, having the, in our eyes, the superior team fighting comp. But when the backline threats were able to get onto Doublelift, he died almost every single fight. Like it was not close.
And one of the amongst many problems, one of the problems that stood out to me was the lantern usage, and that's not even necessarily all on Busio. I know he's the one throwing the lantern, but there were times where also Doublelift is taking the lantern to positions that like does not favor him. So I can kind of give criticism to both Doublelift and Busio for the lantern usage because that's one of their very few escape plans that they had, minus the game where they had the Zillion, I think, if my memory serves. Um, I can't remember. Was game two? Did they have Zillion in game two or no?
No, it was the first game they
No,
had
that was they had
Zillion.
Oriana. That was Oriana. Yeah, they probably could have used the Zillion in the game too, honestly. But yeah, the lantern usage didn't necessarily keep Double Lift safe, and that's a problem because that's one of your main tools to reposition in a team fight. And if you're just repositioning into the middle of FlyQuest, into the middle of Wukong or whatever it is that Speak goes on, things aren't going to go your way. So even though things were sort of going according to plan for 100 Thieves and Doublelift, where like he's getting some resources and usually he's able to pull things off in team fights when he's got the resources. It just FlyQuest didn't let them pull it off. And I think a big part of it was not letting them get into a position where they could lantern him properly and keep him safe.
Yeah, I kind of go back to one of the points that, or I guess one of the negative points that the both of us had against 100 Thieves last week when it came to trying to evaluate their 7 game win streak towards the end of the split. Because while we recognize that winning 7 games in a row is impressive and is no easy task, but we both pointed out that it was important to note the strength of schedule on the games that they were playing. And they had already gotten out of the way the majority of their tough matchups in the first part of the second round robin. And you saw what it looked like when you take a team fighting centric team and put them up against the perceived best team fighting team in the league for the whole split. I mean, when we talk about Cloud9, it's not their team fighting that we're talking about and the reason why they win all these games. It's, their early game and how explosive they are and how fast they can end the game. But in FlyQuest's case, yeah, sure, it's about Prince carrying the game, but for the most part, FlyQuest is winning almost every single late game that they get into from an even game state.
Yeah.
So, give them the advantage and they're going to run away with it.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair because FlyQuest, like you mentioned, didn't have that many early game leads like we would see out of Cloud9, for example. And they did rely on team fighting a lot to execute their game plan. And well, we kind of saw that it's still working for them because we were a little bit worried about FlyQuest, right? And I guess on the FlyQuest point, I guess I want to ask you, like, did this series change your opinion on FlyQuest at all? Or is this like kind of what we expected and they just went 3-0 because they were up against a weaker opponent in 100 Thieves?
I mean, for me, it definitely did. Although I didn't have the greatest of opinions of 100 Thieves going into it, I still think that might not was it maybe it wasn't like a stomp 3-0, but it was a pretty decisive 3-0. I mean, game 2
Yeah.
was really the only game that was kind of close, but for the most part, every single game was pretty methodical and controlled. But, one thing that I mentioned right at the beginning, I felt with Spica, them just willing to mold the whole draft around the new like Wukong pick, which just seems to be the outright best first pick in the game right now. We kind of saw that
Yeah.
develop throughout the whole 4 playoff series that just happened this weekend. Wukong pretty much just turned to the premier jungle pick that you want to get if you're blue side. So basically the ball's on FlyQuest to I mean maybe that was already like the scrim trend that everybody was seeing, but for FlyQuest to do that right out of the gate, just kind of switch up their entire strategy, put the ball in Spica's court, get him on the early aggressive Wukong and let him make plays. That was enough for me to really see that okay, this is a different FlyQuest from what we're seeing. They're innovating, they're doing some different things, and as you then mentioned, for Vikla to do a lot of the heavy lifting throughout most of the games, especially on the Vagar, that was also great to see as opposed to the traditional. We're just going to let Prince carry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Seeing them have different weapons to win fights and to just win the game is a big plus, even if I don't like I mentioned last week I didn't think 100 Thieves was a contender. I think this week kind of showed why, but still, even if I didn't think they were an absolute contender, they're still a good team, I think we'll say, like maybe middle of the pack. And being able to easily 3-0 them definitely raised my hope for FlyQuest, especially since FlyQuest didn't look all that clean lately. So for those two reasons, I think I have a little bit better of an opinion of FlyQuest, but we'll have to talk later about the C9 FlyQuest matchup that's coming up because I think that's a whole nother test. But we will get to that later. Um, Before we move on, because we will talk about the Friday matchup in C9 CLG, just want to remind people hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on YouTube, all that stuff. And if you're new to our channel and you're wondering where you can find this podcast, you can find us Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and then live on Sunday evenings at 7 o'clock East Coast, 4 o'clock West Coast. You can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/Clown Fiesta Podcast. Let's talk about the Friday series, J&T, Cloud9, CLG.
Banger
Where do we
alert.
want to start with this one?
I mean, I think the first thing I mean, obviously we'll talk about CLG again, but I mean to start out with CLG, it felt like they really played up to the level of Cloud9 in this series. You know, when I think going into the playoffs, our thoughts on CLG was, well, can they continue this form that they've been on, which was good because they ended the season uh, winning, going through in the Super Week. Unfortunately, fell to 100 Thieves in that last tiebreaker match, which placed them fourth, unfortunately, up against Cloud9. But you know, this CLG team matches up really well against Cloud9. You know, they have a very aggressive mid jungle and Contracts Palafox who like to play, you know, a lot of early game skirmishing type champions, and I think they just really didn't back down from the challenge of Cloud9. I think a lot of other times we'll see teams in the LCS, you know, not necessarily fight fire with fire when it comes to early game versus late game. You know, when you see one team going for an early game comp, the default can tend to be, oh, well, let's just go late game and hope we can survive the early game. CLG did not take that approach whatsoever. They were like, hey, we are going to challenge you in the early game and challenge you in the first 5 minutes to really make this series difficult for you. And because CLG and Contracts, credit to him once again against Cloud9, making shit happen in the early game.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. They really do test C9 early because everyone knows C9 wants to just choke you out in the early game and then not even let scaling be a factor and just take over the games. And like you said, CLG did not let that happen. And another area that really impressed me out of CLG is their team fighting setups were fantastic. I don't know how Contracts kept finding the flank, but he kept finding the flank. And like C9 was unaware. Now, mind you, I was still pretty damn impressed with how C9, even though they didn't know they were getting flanked all the time, still executed the fights pretty damn well, and in some cases just won the fight anyways. But still, the setups were really, really nice. I came out of this series being even more impressed with CLG than I was last week. And last week, I was really impressed with them last week. If you listen to our last episode, so like, I guess even though we know CLG is no longer after this week, or this weekend, I guess we can say now. Still so much good things to say about this team, and I'm way more excited for this team in summer than I thought I would ever be.
Yeah, I think, you know, when people heard about the same CLG roster going from 2020 to 2023, you know, a lot were excited because they did want to see what can this roster do together. And while they kind of faltered in spring and the regular season for the most part, what we're seeing right now is, I think, what people expected coming into the year, where we see the
Yeah,
CLG lineup. They're really well coordinated. They know what they want to do in the game. You know, I think a sign of a good team in general is one that can play through the early game and can win games early and snowball, because you know, snowballing early games requires a ton of coordination, requires you to make the right plays at the right time, smart split decision making, and that's what we were seeing from CLG in a lot of these early game states. And you know, on the other side, when you talk about Cloud9, credit to them as well, because they also fought themselves back into the early game when CLG was kind of attempting to take over.
yeah. And maybe we should talk about the back door.
It's the
I
front
guess
door,
what
man. It's not the back door. It's the front door. It's
that
just
was pretty embarrassing.
one
I
thing that
have
I
to
want to
say,
say. Sorry, I don't want to cut
go
you off
ahead,
here, but one thing
go
that's
for it.
really interesting to see the huge dynamic switch up when it comes to fighting Dragon around the LCS. Everybody does it through bot lane now. You know, for whatever reason, maybe it's because it's double lift, but feels like ever since double lift really started preaching this idea of entering drag fights through the bot side of the map, it feels like every team has adopted this except for Cloud9, because Cloud9 continues to put, you know, the majority of their resources in the mid and late game into, you know, having pushing mid. And it feels like other teams just really don't care about that anymore. And when you don't care about your mid lane when it goes late game, the threat of just running down mid and ending the game just explodes over the game time because of how fast you can run down that lane and do damage. And when teams just decide to forego mid pressure instead to go bot to walk into the dragon through river through bot side, they are really just forgetting how fast you can run down mid. It is much, much different from doing it in the side lane.
Yeah, so I agree. However, there are opportunities where, or there are times rather, where it's good, and there are times where it's bad. When your inhibitor's down and you got super minions in your base already, it's pretty damn bad, and that's what cost them that game. Like I honestly cannot believe they left a super minion in their base, knowing full well that that Cloud9 had TP, And look, I get it. That's a tough situation for CLG to be in because there's going to be a fight at Drake and you want to be there, but you still need to know that like that game is just so easily ended with Fudge being able to TP. Like Jace is not going to take long to take down those towers. So that's one thing. If the inhibitor's down, I don't think you can ever go through bot. But I do think that the good thing about going through the bot lane is when you aren't the team with priority and you don't have all the vision in river. It's like, why fight through trying to clear all of these wards in like pixel brush and all these small corridors when you can just go through bot and not have to fight through that much vision? Like, to me, there are times where it makes total sense and there are times when it doesn't make sense, and that one, it did not make any sense.
Yeah.
But I do recognize, very easy for me to say sitting here watching the games, right? They have a whole another level of pressure of trying to make something happen where they're just like, you're doomed if you do or if you don't.
And not even just a team like Cloud9. I think in this meta that we're seeing evolve within the LCS and around the world, where it is shifting back to more the traditional front to back team comps. Top is playing a tank. Jungle, more likely than not, is playing some form of utility champion. It'll be mid and bot carries with a, in general, more peeling / enchantress support. And when these things, when this type of a meta, you know, comes around, it feels like backdooring and side laning just all of a sudden skyrockets through the roof, because you can get to certain points within games where if one team is clearly stronger than the other in a 5v5, what's the word? The death ball, as they like to call it. One team has got to make a decision to either say, hey, if we're going to take these 5v5s, we got to be very creative about how we do it. And in the C9 versus CLG sense, we saw a lot of flanking from both teams in a bunch of the different games. Game 2, especially when Cloud9 switched up and sort of went for the Kennen pick. I think CLG did actually a good job in response to that by flexing Palafox into the top lane for the lane phase, or trying to get the Jace versus Kennen matchup instead of the Cassante mid flex that Cloud9 was rolling for. But when you're at these 5v5 stalemates, you got to do something to switch up the dynamic of the game. And like I said, like side laning can be a huge part of that if you recognize that your team is going to be weaker than the others. So I think especially nowadays with the meta, expect to see a lot more of this, where side laning will become more and more important.
And to me, that was one of the weaknesses we saw out of CLG, was their side laning. I think it's been consistent all split long that Doka's died in side lanes. That's been my main criticism of him, which to me, like, I think he becomes such a better player if he learns to back off and just understand when he's weak side and doesn't need to contest CS. Like, I think he becomes such a better player um, if he's able to manage side lanes. But we also saw Palafox was put in side lane during that series, and he got picked off a couple of times as well. So to me, like, that's the main thing CLG needs to look after, is just understanding when they can pressure and when they can't. And then the one last thing I wanted to do is ask you, Jinter, about Cloud9. Was we came into the playoffs saying like we think they're the heavy favorite. We think it's more likely they win than anybody else in the league, than all the rest rather. But I want to ask you, what is their weakness? If there's a team to take them down, did CLG expose the weakness? Not really. What do you think is the weakness of C9, and how perhaps FlyQuest would maybe attack them in the series, or anybody would, I guess?
I mean, I think CLG has done a pretty good job of providing like a little bit of a blueprint over both this series and the game they did actually beat them in the Super Week, which would have been, a week and a half ago. So it does seem that Cloud9, the way that they like to operate in the early game is they operate with the assumption that their lanes are ahead. And for the most part, they normally
True.
are. So it allows their laners to play super, super aggressive. Whenever you look at a Cloud9 game, you will constantly see if mid and top have their winning matchups, they are looking to harass, shove, and manipulate the wave in their favor as much as they possibly can. And from the enemy perspective, it can sometimes feel a bit suffocating when all of your lanes are getting pushed in, and it feels like your jungler, you have to go, it's like, oh shit, like bot's getting pushed in, I might have to go bot to cover a dive. Oh, top's also getting pushed in. Well, do I go cover the top dive or what? But CLG, it felt like, did a good job of just ignoring all like the fog that's around them, is just like committing to their play and going for it. If they know that Blabber is showing on one side of the map, just you got to go for that play. You got to take your advantages where they present themselves, because for the most part, as we talked about with Cloud9, they will do everything they can to suffocate you out of the early game, which means pushing all your lanes as hard as possible, allows you to get river control, which could lead to invading your jungle, doing dragon, getting Rift Herald, and you constantly see Cloud9 rocking out of, they get a 1K gold lead at 10 minutes sometimes purely just through farming. And, for the most part, we don't necessarily see gold leads like that just accrue through laning. It just doesn't really happen anymore, it feels like. And with CLG, you just gotta not give them that respect. You gotta be able to go at them, fight fire with fire, and I think that's really what we saw and the approach that teams should take. Because I think if you try to pit, late game scaling against Cloud9, they're just gonna run through you.
I agree. You can't outscale them. They won't allow you to scale. So you have to contest them in the early game. And to me, I think you need to focus mid. MNS has been good since he's joined the league, but he has been susceptible to ganks. So, and again, still small sample size, right? We're still learning more and more about MNS every week. I think for now, my game plan going up against Cloud9 would be I would camp mid as much as we can, as much as you possibly can, because he plays super aggro. And honestly, I think you might know where I'm going with this,
Yeah,
Jinjin.
yeah,
It is a
I
little bit.
Jojo
It
Puna
is.
esque.
Well, I was gonna say Summit, but I guess
Oh, oh,
JoJo as
oh.
well.
I thought you were
Actually,
gonna go with the Jojo Pune route.
I think both apply, honestly. That's funny we came to the same conclusion with different examples, but I think both of those apply to how you actually want to try to attack Cloud9 because I think MNS does play super aggro and we have seen him start to get punished. I think teams are starting to learn it and I think we'll see more focus on the mid lane out of the teams going up against C9 and the rest of the playoffs.
Yeah, but I mean, for the most part, I think we both said this at the beginning. This series was a lot about CLG playing up to the level of Cloud9.
Mhm.
When you hear the headline, Cloud9 has a very close series against CLG, you might think, oh, Cloud9 is like, they have a close series against CLG. Like, fuck, Cloud9 must be trolling. Like, no, man, CLG played well.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go to the Saturday series. We're going back to 100 Thieves now against Golden Guardians. I didn't really think either team looked particularly great. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I messaged you this. What was it after game one? Was it after game one or game two? I think it might have
I
been.
don't remember.
Well, I remember I messaged you. I was just like, I think both of these teams are just bad.
Oh, you
And
did.
I
Yeah,
think
I see it now. I'm
I
looking
can't
at
remember if that
it.
was after game one, after game two, or sometime in between game one and two. But man, it for whatever reason, this series just felt like a super messy series.
It really did. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to look at the timestamp of the message. I can't find it.
Well, anyway, I mean, you get into game one, and dude, I'm not gonna lie. I thought Golden Guardians had that game one on lock after that first dragon. I was like, honestly considering like there's no point in watching the rest of this game. It should be free win. Let me go make some food or something because you had a comp from Golden Guardians which was designed to skirmish and fight in the early and mid game versus the 100 Thieves God scaling late game team comp. And 100 and Golden Guardians had like a 2.5 3k gold lead after the first drag because it was what 6-0 in kills. That game should be over 10 out of 10 times. Honestly, 10 out of 10 times. But Golden Guardians straight up trolling around the Rift Herald team fight. I have no idea what was going on. Stixay is like dashing over a wall trying to get out at the same time that River is engaging, while his mid laner is also sitting mid farming the wave. Omega troll.
I think they just wait way too long to take the fight. Like they're trying to pull in 100 Thieves so that they can engage on them with like Vi, which makes total sense of how you want to do that. It's just like it feels like you've already baited 100 Thieves into coming towards you, but they're just too slow to pull the trigger. And like I don't know what the hesitation is in starting the team fight once you've got them where you want them. But that was something that we saw multiple times in this series. But I will push back a little bit on the game should be over 10 times out of 10 times because you're going heavy dive with Vi into Zillion. And like Zillion kind of counters what you want to do with Vi. Now I understand there's other champions in the game and I'm oversimplifying it, but that is something that counters what Golden Guardians want to do. And I'm guessing that's what the reason was for their hesitation. But like you've drafted what you drafted. You can't just not play to your style. Like if you're Vi, you need to hit R on someone. Like you need to go. You can't wait forever. You can't wait for 100 Thieves to scale. They're gonna outscale you. So yeah, it was really weird that game one. I still agree with you that I think Golden Guardians should have been able to close it out, but I understand why they weren't able to, and I think a big part of it is Doublelift was just getting more resources, and whenever they needed to, Bjergsen could just hit R on top of his head.
Yeah, I think maybe it was like I mean, maybe it's not as simple as I'm making it out to be, but at the same time, when you are 3,000 gold up at a Rift Herald fight, which you are calling for, and then proceed to have the most uncoordinated team fight I've seen so far this year in the LCS, literally, go back and watch it. Stixay is kind of getting caught on the side because 100 Thieves realize, like, hey, we're in a really terrible spot. They're on all sides of us. We need to pick a side. They pick the left side. Stixay uses Zeri to jump the wall from that entire long wall from like the top lane Tribrush to the lane. And as he is in the midst of dashing, River is ulting in on Vi while his mid laner is still mid farming the wave. Like, dude, that is just horrid.
It felt like the team fight execution was pretty lackluster
Like
in
at
this
an
series.
all-time low.
Um, what was I gonna say? There was another team fight that I wanted to talk about. Maybe I'll think about it later. The other thing that I think 100 Thieves should have been pretty embarrassed about was game two.
Yeah,
They have the so Golden Guardians has Wukong, Lucian, and Nami. I'm calling in draft. I'm talking with Andrew and I'm saying they're gonna dive them level 3. Like bot lane's getting dove. You need to know this. And the Wukong, Lucian, Nami for Golden Guardians is going up against Vi, Jinx, Nautilus. So Lucian Nami's gonna get prio there. The monkey is just a little bit better than the Vi earlier on when neither of them have ulti. I thought it was pretty clear what Golden Guardians were gonna do, and they still have closer path away. Like this is probably closer's decision, honestly, but maybe a team decision. Closer paths away from the bot lane, and the dive is just so free. I get maybe it's not super free because like Nautilus isn't the easiest champion to dive, but free enough. And then they obviously fell behind because they just gave a double kill over to Golden Guardians, and to me that was like, you really didn't see that coming. Like I feel like 100 Thieves was probably a little embarrassed that they let that happen.
it's the kind of tower dive where at the very worst, maybe one person dies, but you're still going to get both kills and they lose the whole wave. Like, I'm in the same boat as you. When I was watching that, it was the most obvious bot lane tower dive at level 2, 3 that I've ever seen in my life. I
Yeah,
mean,
you could predict it from draft.
and I mean, like you were kind of mentioning, the other thing that was confusing about it was the fact that Closer chose to path away from bot lane, and whether or not that was his decision, whether or not that was a team's decision, is confusing in and of itself. Because when you have two pushing lanes in the early game of top and mid, the fact that your jungler is pathing away from your one losing lane just didn't make any sense whatsoever. And this is exactly like something that we were mentioning, discussing teams like Cloud9, or even discussing a team like CLG potentially, who had a lot of success against a team like 100 Thieves, just being able to roll them in the early game. And that game 2 of Golden Guardians in this series was all of the fears of 100 Thieves coming into existence right in that moment. It was like, holy fuck, this team sucks nuts at early. If you beat them, they will lose. And that's what should have happened in game 1.
Yeah, it was a little bit surprising. And you know what though? Benefit of the doubt is like sometimes there is bad information leading a jungler to
That's
decide
fair.
to do something
Yeah.
else. Like maybe there was a deep ward and someone said, "Oh, I think I saw the jungler here," but the jungler wasn't there. Something like that stuff does happen. So I don't want to say with absolute certainty what happened there, but I guess what I'm saying is we don't know for sure. Another area where I want to give some credit is I thought Busio looked so much better in this series, man. So I thought Busio looked maybe boosted is a little bit harsh in the first series. I didn't think his hooks were all that good, right? His thresh looked to struggle quite a bit in the first series, but then the second series against Golden Guardians, Busio became a hook master on the Blitzcrank. I think that game was so 1v9, and that was probably my favorite game of the series because I don't know, it just felt like we saw Busio be what he was hyped up to be as this young prospect with a lot of promise, and then he 1v9's a playoff game. Yes, it was against Golden Guardians, but it was a playoff game, and it was so 1v9. That to me, I was like, that was my favorite game of the series, I think.
Yeah, game 3 was actually pretty cool to watch. Especially the way that 100 Thieves kind of, because the way that the game, for the people who don't exactly remember, I'll kind of try to explain how this early game went. But Golden Guardians got the pushing done in the early parts of the lane phase. They rotate their Thresh into the enemy jungle to get some vision down. But at the same time, like 100 Thieves tracked the fact that River and who he left bot lane to go into the enemy jungle, and they do this weird route where they 3-man run up through the Tribrush to cut them off in River, forcing 100 Thieves to go, or forcing Golden Guardians to go the long way around. And then after they go the long way around, they reflanked behind them to then flash over and kill River. It honestly was a pretty genius like play that they did. And if you go back and watch the game, I think that's mad credit to 100 Thieves for recognizing that jungler support ran into our jungle. We can cut them off on their way back to the lane and just kill them. So
And that game just got out of hand from that play. They snowballed
yeah,
so hard. We saw Closer back on the Viego. He was popping off as we expect him to do on the Viego. I guess I said it was Busio 1v9, but there was a lot of credit to give out to the 100 Thieves players in that game. Just Busio to me was the biggest standout because I think that's what really got the game rolling.
Yeah, it
Um,
felt like to me like that game specifically, and that was all about the team performance and team coordination. But Busio, he was the guy that actually had to go out and execute on those plays. Like, sure, it's a very team oriented thing, but you got to go hit those hooks, man.
That I
So
thought the series was over after that game. I thought this is going to be a 3-100 Thieves. And then honestly, even though Licorice got player of the series, I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of surprised by that. But even though he was AFK from games 1 to 3, I thought he really did turn it on in game 4 and 5. 4 more specifically. I thought Licorice actually looked pretty good on the Olaf. He had a good Olaf game and that was really nice to see. Do I think he was player of the series? Not really. No, honestly. But hey, you know what? Credit where it's due because he's been really useless for a lot of this split. And so I don't know. I was really happy to see Licorice um, really start to perform, even if it was later in the series. Better late than never. And they won game 4 and 5, both off of two good performances. First one the Olaf, second one the Gwen.
yeah, it was. I mean, I kind of thought that after game two, Golden Guardians wasn't necessarily going to get their hands on Lucianami again because it felt like 100 Thieves was a little bit scared of getting rolled by Lucianami, but they seemed to not care about it, and I think that was probably another mistake that they made in that game four. And I think that's another thing. I don't want to keep going back to talking about Cloud9 when it comes to 100 Thieves, but in a world where it was C9 versus 100 Thieves and you gave up Lucianami to them, like, you are going to get your asses rolled in lane.
Yeah, maybe. The other thing is though is that I don't mind letting the Nami Lucian through. I don't think it's that strong of a bot lane. I think it's pretty obvious what they want to do, and if you can just stop them from diving you early, and like I feel like Lucian needs a really hard snowball to be useful. And well, Closer just well, we call it cheese gank, right? He level 2 ganked bot lane and just stopped the full level 3 dive game plan that Golden Guardians had. And
Hmm.
I think they still ended up winning that game somehow, but like
Yeah.
to me that's all you really need to do to stop the Nami Lucian. I don't think that that bot lane is that good, honestly, but they pulled it off, I guess. So
One thing that made me a little bit sad, especially in that game four, was, dude, I don't know, Faker, he changed the meta again. Like, they're going aftershock
aftershock, I saw
Everfrost,
it.
like, bro. But Faker did it in KT versus T1. I was like, bro, he ruined his own technology.
Oh
Man,
no, JNT, no,
everyone's going
now
aftershock and Everfrost now. Rest in
is this the
peace.
part where you tell me that Faker's wrong with his build also, or are you gonna finally bend
I can't
on this one?
I can't I can't talk back to Faker. I mean, if he's going
Okay,
Everfrost aftershock, then I have to go Everfrost aftershock.
okay, we're saved, guys. This is good news. JNT might only be the second best player in the world, right behind Faker.
Yeah, sorry guys. Unfortunately for you.
Okay, last thing for me to talk about is the final play because everyone's talking about it where Double Lift is kind of caught out of position and Stixay on the Zeri goes psycho mode and goes after him.
Big Dixie mode, as they
I
say.
didn't see that happening. I did not see that coming, and that was a gutsy play. And as so many people have said, I completely agree. If he dies there, they probably lose the game and he gets hard flamed.
Dude, it
So
was
I don't even know what to say about that play. It was just wild.
it's the alternate timeline of Golden Guardians versus TSM season 10 where FBI tried to flash in and make the monster play, but he failed. But in this universe it was Stixay and he succeeded. So it's just alternate timeline season 10 Golden Guardians versus TSM, if people remember that.
I like I don't have any analysis on that play. I was just stunned. I was like, "Oh my god." Because the other thing too is that whole time I thought for sure that I thought for sure 100 Thieves was still going to win the series. Like maybe it's just the plot armor of Double Lift and Bjerg, but as I'm watching that, I'm going like I think 100 Thieves is just going to win this anyways. And it only sunk in when they lost that final team fight and I'm like, "Oh my god, Golden Guardians can end." And they just won the series and knocked them out. That was the only time that I had doubt that 100 Thieves was losing that series until it didn't occur to me until it was over.
It was pretty wild. It's definitely an upset that not a lot of people expected. I mean, it feels like the analyst test did. I think like the analyst test had like two people pick Golden Guardians to win, the other two picked 100 Thieves. But I don't know about that. But it felt like the majority of people thought that 100 Thieves was going to win this series. I think both of us even thought that if this was the matchup that we expected, that 100 Thieves was just going to roll them. So for Golden Guardians to be pretty competitive in this series, it feels like we always say we got to credit the other team, and it's not just always one team failing. So good for
Also,
Golden
I
Guardians to pick up the win, but I think we can all agree that 100 Thieves wasn't the cleanest of opponents.
I so true, but I forgot to mention because I mentioned how earlier on in the series they were just too slow to pull the trigger on any fights, and it kept costing them honestly. But in that last game where they decided to go for Baron, that to me was a great call and a risky call, by the way, because like things weren't going their way. They needed to make something happen. And how many times have we seen in just the LCS teams that like only our strong teams are afraid to take are not afraid to take a risk, right? And they go for something. That was like Golden Guardians decided, hey, you know what? This isn't going our way. Let's do something. They decided to flip Baron. Not even really flip. They kind of like snuck Baron, and that was what swung the game for them too. It wasn't just the last team fight. It was saying, look, guys, if we sit here and do nothing, we're gonna lose and we're gonna be eliminated. We have to make something happen, and they did. So that was another shout out to Golden Guardians for that. That was a I don't know, big brain play, I
That was
guess.
their Kodak moment, you could say.
Yeah,
I know you're not a
yeah.
basketball guy, but I don't know if you got that reference.
That's a basketball reference? I thought that was like the picture
Oh,
company.
oh, well, that's good. Well, I think I got popularized through basketball, but you are
Oh.
correct. It is the picture thing, but
Dude,
that
I
be
forgot all about Kodak or whatever as a company. Who the
became
hell
like
talks about that anymore? That was where you used to print out like the old
yeah.
photos or whatever. You'd have to deliver them or whatever.
You know who Reggie Miller is?
I know
Uh,
the name.
he uses it in his like broadcasting career. It's pretty cool.
Mm. Anyway.
Anyway,
Anyways, that series was crazy. Golden Gardens is moving on. We'll talk a little bit about their series with EG coming up a little bit. And the last series of the weekend happened like an hour or two ago. We just started recording not too long after. Where do we start with this one, Jinter? This was a close 3-0 in my eyes.
it was the Clown Guest podcast classic of a close 3-0, as we say. You know, there can be close 3-0s, there can be close 3-1s, there can be stompy, 3-2s, it can be a one-sided 3-2, and this was your typical very close 3-0 because it felt like every single game was on a knife's edge.
Yeah, I like. First of all, I think EG is back. Should we say that? Is EG back?
They're well, if you want to say they're back, I'm saying they're getting back.
Okay, yeah, they're definitely not trash anymore. Like
Yeah.
JoJo did not sprint it this series, which is like that was that. I mean, that's what we're looking for. We're like going into this series. I'm going like JoJo, please, man, just don't run it down. And honestly, I think we even said put him on Ari. Didn't
Hey,
we say that? There was
he
two
took my
people last week.
advice. He took
There
my
was two
advice.
people
Pick
last week
Ari.
that we said should be on Ari. I think Vikla was the other one, but
Bjork was the other. Right? I
maybe the
thought.
Vagar was pretty good.
Yeah. Well,
I
we
think it
know
was
one of them
Vikla.
was JoJo.
Yeah. And honestly, the Ari charms, man. He's landing them things, especially game 1. And honestly, he just wasn't dying on repeat. And
Yeah.
if you have to put him on Ari for that to work out, then great. And the one I think it was banned in one game. Game 3 he had to play Vagar.
Yeah.
And game 3 the Vagar, you would think that he'd get caught out a lot because we saw it happen against 100 Thieves with Tenacity on the Gragas not too long ago, like 1 or 2 weeks ago. And the Vagar didn't get picked off all that much, and his cages were great too. So it's like, okay, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. We saw 3 games, but they're looking back. They're looking like they're back to normal. Uh, I guess they saved themselves some time because they have another week of scrims to practice when they're not all sick and when they can, maybe try other picks, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I said this before the series happened. I mean, it was going to be a good indication for EG whether or not they were in the studio because I think they said it at the beginning of the series when they were interviewing Freeze, the EG head coach. They were saying how this is the first time they've been in the studio for 3 weeks, and when he said that, I was like, "Damn, it's been 3 weeks!" Like, but for them to be back now, presumably all healthy again because they are in studio, I think we are very likely to see, the older version of EG rather than whatever we saw in the last 2 weeks of the regular season.
Vulcan even said himself, he's like, in the post game interview with Revenge, he's like, I was kind of nervous because we haven't played in studio in a while. And like, Vulcan nervous? Like, that's something you kind of forget. Like, he's just been around for so long. I wouldn't think nerves even existing for him. But you got to remember, I guess, at the end of the day, they're all human, and playoffs puts the pressure on no matter who you are, even if you're a long time veteran like Vulcan.
Yeah.
Which also, he said that he didn't think he played that good of a series. Did I miss something? Like, I didn't think Vulcan had that bad of a series, did he?
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe he just had the Thresh game in his mind where he wasn't necessarily hitting a lot of hooks, but his Ashen game too was pretty sick.
Yeah, like CLG did a good job in that game of like sticking around considering how bad that bot lane matchup is. I I was talking with you during Champ Select. I kept saying Varus, and then I was like, "Yep, Varus Ash." Varus Ash came in, and you knew that. Even Revenge was saying it too on the cast. Like you knew they were in deep trouble once you saw Varus Ash. Even with Ash nerfs, like I don't think people were too worried about that because you can get hella prio, you can push up and you grab plates over and over again, and Ash is broken and can just see the whole map whenever she feels like it, which is also not fair. So how do you gank a lane when they always know where you are when they always know where you are as contracts?
Yeah,
It's just not really fair.
the icing on that cake was the pre-game interview they did with the CLG head coach saying that they were completely fine giving up Ash Varus with the matchup that they got, and then they proceed to get completely obliterated. Oh my god, it
In
was so
fairness,
funny.
in fairness though, they almost like there was a few different team fights in that series where or in that game rather when going into the fight I was like I could see CLG winning a fight here, and in the post game analysis with like Emily and Jat and Mark and all them, like they were even pointing out that there was a couple of hiccups as far as like how they were executing on these team fights that if they might have fixed those things they might have actually won that game. So even though I was totally in the revenge side of things where he's saying this draft sucks for EG or for CLG rather, I actually didn't necessarily I kind of changed my mind as the series went on. I kind of started to see where CLG was coming from in taking the heavy engage comp into 280 carries, right? Like Ash and Varus are pretty damn immobile. You can kind of lock them down fairly easily. And as Buster in the live chat points out, Palafox, he says if Palafox didn't choke on Vex, and I kind of agree. That's kind of the thing that the analysts were talking about post game. That like the Vex wasn't exactly the greatest, even though the pick was fine. The execution wasn't the greatest, and so a little bit disappointing because I think Palafox had such a good split, and for the most part had two good series over the weekend. Just not that particular game.
I want to cope for Palafox a little bit because, I think it really went awry when he got his flash blown level 3 because, I mean, I'm like, I mean, Blue Jay said it, not me. I may not be Faker, but I'm the second best. I'm right back there. But from what I
Yeah.
understand about Vex as a champion, like she has that threat of the all in. That is what makes this champion scary, especially when you hit level 6. And obviously, it is a very good disengage champ, having the AOE fear and whatnot. But getting your flash blown early in that lane really really sucks because it just basically means that you have almost no kill threat up until your flash comes back on cooldown. And once that happened, Jojo P was already level 7, and they basically turned to like getting Jojo P the hell out of there from that lane once Ari hit level 9, basically, which is what you want to do anyway, because once Ari gets 5 points in her Q, she can one shot every single wave. But getting his flash blown in that game really hurt his overall, I think, impact on that game. I think that is something that will kind of go unseen when you look at, the series in general, but him getting his flashbone in the early game really minimized that pick, it felt like to me.
You know what else I should have mentioned at the start when we were talking about JoJo not getting picked off every 2 seconds was building the Banshee's Veil in this game is definitely
Mhm.
like that is a JoJo Pion item right there. That is what you want in building, which honestly, if you're gonna have a guy play as aggro as JoJo does, build that, right? There's nothing wrong if you're going to play that aggro if you have a defensive tool available to you that allows you to play that way. So maybe that's all we've been waiting for. It's just JoJo to, hey, you know what? Pick a defensive item and maybe you're good to play the way you play, you know?
EG, they were just doing like some big brain stuff. They set a trap card like 2-3 weeks ago when Jojo Pion was inting, and then game 3, it's like, okay, this guy's not on R anymore. Maybe we can actually go kill him. Guess what? EG used that as a weapon in their arsenal. What was it, like 2 times? They were sitting in a side lane and waiting for CLG to come and punish Jojo Pion when he was split pushing on a no mobility champion like Veigar. I think we both thought that was pretty funny when that first one happened, where he was pushing topside, contractors in the bush, his whole team was waiting around Tribrush, and they
Mm.
send it for JoJo. He Zanya's, EG cleans up, and I think they got Baron
He's the
off that, but
perfect he's the perfect bait, right? Like
exactly.
everyone has seen him run it down so hard for like, I don't know, most of the split honestly, like at least half the games. If you're going to bait with someone, he's the perfect guy for it. And I think they used perhaps one of their old weaknesses to their advantage to turn it into a strength, and that was pretty funny to see that happen. So that was pretty cool. Also, as good as I think Contracts has been lately, he also did die a couple of times in this series in like fairly costly times, like where they're trying to set up for drag vision and then he gets caught by, again, credit to Jojo for hitting the Vagar cage on the Gragas on Contracts Gragas. So there were like there's some credit to give to EG side, but also Contracts. We hadn't seen him get caught out in quite some time, and he got caught a couple of times in this series. So I was a little bit disappointed, but overall, I still have so much good to say about Contracts that it's like it feels a little bad to focus on those two little things.
Yeah, I think contracts. He did have a really good, he had a good split.
Are we good to move on to our funeral?
Oh yeah, the teams who
Let's
died.
I mean, we're talking about CLG already, and they died and they are eliminated. So, just to keep you guys in the loop as to what the heck I'm talking about, whenever a team is eliminated and they die, we do a little funeral. We say our goodbyes, and then we also say if you're like the management side of things, or not even just the management, if you're just the CLG in this case, this team, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy do you think they are with this split? Um, I could go first, JT, or do you want to go first?
You can go first.
I am going to give them a 7. I think they are actually quite happy with this split. I know people are going to be a little bit surprised at that high of a ranking because they made playoffs and then they lost both series. But you know what, though? To me, it's not about just do they win or lose. Like this team was looking rough in the middle of the split. And to me, I just think they've gotten so much better. I think, especially if we normally do it from how happy they are from the start of the split, expectations from the start of the split. But I'm going to rewind again to go back to last spring and remind people just how bad this roster was, man. Like this team was really, really bad. And I just think they've gotten so much better. And I know people are going to point to the series against Cloud9 in summer where they went 3-2. I still think this version of CLG looks better than that one. And I know that probably sounds crazy seeing them go 0-3 against EG today. I just think they were competitive in all of their games this weekend against two really good teams. And I think also you could also say that Palafox and Contracts are among the better mid jungle duos in the league, whereas like there's no shot we would have said that a year ago.
I
So I think this team could be excited going into summer, and I think that's a reason to be happy, and I give them a 7.
I think I'd probably put them fourth, maybe mid jungle. Blabber and
I
MNS are above them.
Yep.
JoJo and Inspired are above them.
The JoJo inspired one's kind of like hard to say because JoJo.
They're
But
better than
okay,
them.
when they're normal, when they're their normal self, they are better. Sorry, continue.
And I think I'm trying to think of maybe other ones that I put above them. Maybe Golden Guardians mid jungle, but
I think for sure CLG sits in the 3 to 5 range, and no matter
for
what, they're
sure.
in the top half.
They're on average they're 4, and that's
And
great.
if you want to even give them the 3, I would be okay with that. I don't know if I would myself, but they're in that area, which is like that to me is so amazing considering where they were before. And yeah, just this team is constantly improving. We thought that they were going to be well quite bad, especially in the middle of the split. I was really worried for them. So I think there's a lot of good to come out of what we saw at a CLG this split.
As far as my score, I'm in the same boat as you. I went with an 8 actually.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that had to do with, for the most part, the community's ranking of this team before the split started. A lot of them had them either just inside the playoff picture at number 6 or just outside the playoff picture, anywhere from 7 to 8. I actually had them outside the playoff picture at number 7. So the fact that, they were in playoffs even to begin with, I thought was them pushing up above what I thought their expectations were. And then also,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, the way that they were able to challenge both Cloud9 and Evil Geniuses is, nothing but credit to them. And I kind of I'm agreeing with Jat a little bit, who talked about it on the broadcast just after the series ended. I think CLG just got a bit unlucky. Like, they faced Cloud9, who is, potentially the clear-cut best team, and I'm in Jat's boat where when EG looks like normal EG is the second best team in the league. So I think,
Mhm.
a bit unlucky for CLG because I
Yeah.
think they were looking like one of the best teams outside of, FlyQuest, Cloud9, and Evil Geniuses. I think they were that fourth place team, and that unfortunate loss to 100 Thieves in the tiebreaker put them in this situation, but they made it two very competitive series against two very strong teams.
there's a chance that they just played 1 and 2. There's a chance that they just played both finalists, right? Now, FlyQuest could still prove us wrong. I'm not trying to get ahead of ourselves here, but there's a chance that they just lost to the 2 best teams that got knocked out for that.
Mhm.
Uh, Unlucky.
Yeah.
The other team to get eliminated, 100 Thieves. I'll let you start with this one. What is your score for how 100 Thieves feels about their split?
I, I I went with a 3. And
Ooh, not happy. Okay.
well, it's hard to say because I think by their own expectations, obviously, like it was probably a complete failure. But I think, my own expectations, I think our expectations that this team wasn't necessarily going to come out and look like the best team in the league. I don't think anybody was expecting that or, thinking that that was going to happen. There were other strong teams to have faith in at the beginning of the split when it came to, Evil Geniuses, Cloud9, FlyQuest, Team Liquid. Obviously, Team Liquid didn't really fit into that picture, but it felt like 100 Thieves was a clear step behind everyone else the entire split. And whether that was the first place team, even the second place team, even the third place team, but let's not forget, guys, this team was 4-7, not looking very good at all. And if not for the sudden switch up in meta in general to the hypercarry bot tank top thing that we've seen, I think this team wouldn't have made playoffs. So I mean, I don't know.
Possible. That
I'm pretty down on this team to be honest. So that's why I'm at a 3.
I'm not that down. I gave them a 5. I think they're so-so. Now, this will vary from if you ask Doublelift versus if you ask Busio, for example. To me, I kind of want to zoom out and say, look, yes, it's Doublelift and Bjergsen, and these guys want championships and nothing else. However, coming into this year, there's a lot of question marks around this team, right? You don't know how Tenacity is going to perform. Busio, we don't know how Doublelift was going to perform. The guy hadn't played pro in like 2 years or whatever. And again, the last time we saw Doublelift on TSM or whatever it was TSM, he didn't look that great. Like he just didn't. And so, to me, I think that you could be happy seeing Doublelift is able to carry games when you give him resources still. So, like, he's still Doublelift. That is good. And I thought Tenacity and Busio got so much better as the split went on. I thought Closer started to look more like Closer as the split went on. And I thought Bjergsen, even though he's no longer the GOAT kind of skill level, I think he's still a good mid laner, if not great. So I still think that there's lots to look forward to going into summer. Like I think this team did maybe their record was up and down, but I think their skill level slowly increased as the split went on. So I think there's still some things to cope around, even if they just lost 2 playoff series. So I gave them a 5.
I think that's definitely fair, and I definitely agree with your point when you look at the two rookies and showing their improvement kind of on a game by game basis. So I think with that point, I'm definitely there. But I mean, it's got to be a huge disappointment for the veterans for sure.
Yeah. And I would say a prayer for them if I knew how to. I don't know how to do a prayer,
I'll
honestly.
do hit him with one of these. I know you can see
But
that, but I did the
I
the,
will
f-
see it
the
on.
forehead with the touch your shoulders and then touch
Oh
the middle of your
yes,
chest. I'll give him one
yeah.
of those.
I don't even know like the Lord's Prayer. Do you know that?
No, unfortunately not.
My dad's gonna smack me upside the head if I don't even know how to. Oh, Travis Gafford is rating. Thanks, Travis.
What's good?
Um, yeah, I don't even know what to say. I don't know how to pray for these guys. We just say rest in peace to CLG and to 100 Thieves, and well, we wish them luck in summer.
Yeah.
Where are we going next, Jinter?
Well, obviously there was, we go on Reddit and when it comes to the Clown Fiesta podcast, and obviously there was a moment from the Cloud9 versus Cloud9 versus CLG series, that a lot of people took notice of, and that was, the segment where Latigris was casting this team fighter on Mountain Drag, where I mean, I'm not going to try to beat around the bush here, but she got a lot of things wrong. Like, she thought the dragon died and it didn't die, and it wasn't necessarily calling out things that were happening in the fight. And it, it's kind of a discussion that we've been having somewhat regularly, when it came to the spring split on the broadcast. But the casting with the LCS right now, we're obviously seeing a ton of fresh faces, people like, Rafa, Kangas, Cubby, Phil
Joshi.
Joshi. What's the
Yeah, we're
other?
seeing a lot of new talent.
There's another guy's name whom I'm forgetting.
I don't even remember who you said, but
I feel bad for getting his name now because he's the only one whom I haven't mentioned. But
I'm sorry, JNT. I can't help you here
I don't,
because I
I don't
didn't even
remember his
remember who
name.
you
I'm
said.
sorry.
Well, it looks like the raid got here just in time for a spicy one. Look, there's a massive Reddit post, and unfortunately, Latigris is not on the good end of things. I get so frustrated with this stuff, and I have zero frustration with Latigris, none whatsoever. If you want to ask my personal opinion, I don't think she's a good caster. I'll just be completely honest with you guys. Well, we've never strayed away from being honest. What I do have a problem with is the constant flame that she has to put up with from the community. And look, I have no problem. Like, if you don't think she's a good caster, fine. That is totally fine. I I saw her tweet about something the other day, and on a totally unrelated note, she just gets a reply that says, "Stop casting, please. No one likes your casting." That is so cringe, and I'm so fed up with that. I don't think any caster should have to put up with that. And the other area that I'm really frustrated with is the LCS, who continues to put her out on the cast, which I don't think she's being set up for success. I just don't think that she is ready to be an LCS caster. And I have no problem whatsoever if there are people that say, you know what, I love her cast. No problem whatsoever. I just think there's a ton of people who really don't. And I think that it's been really, the community has been incredibly vocal about this. And I think the longer you keep her in there, the more that she's going to have to get flamed from the community. And I just don't think that's fair to any caster.
Yeah, one thing I want to give it a little bit of credit to I Will Dominate. I know he's normally the guy who is usually enthralled in all the hate and loves to give his opinion on a numerous amount of topics, more often than not, usually flaming. But I do want to credit him in the situation because I was watching a clip of his on his YouTube channel where he was discussing this whole situation where he was kind of reviewing the Latigris clip. And I think he was making a lot of fair, criticisms about it and, giving from what I can understand, a pretty healthy perspective relative to a lot of other stuff that he's saying about numerous different league topics. But I think the main thing that's important to note with play by play casting, you know, whether it's league or a different esport or a sport, the most important thing is communicating the relevant information. And I think for me, that was the biggest problem of what was going on with that whole, that clip of Latigris where yeah, sure, the game was kind of devolving into chaos and team fights were getting really sporadic and chaotic. But when that's going on, the job of the caster is to be able to communicate the key information from what's going on in the game to the audience. And I guess my biggest problem with the whole scenario is to me, it just feels like she doesn't do a great job at that. Obviously, everybody's going to point to the big mistake that she made where she thought that, Cloud9 killed the mountain dragon and made that as a vocal call. And then obviously when the drag wasn't dead, there was like this super awkward moment where like nothing was being said. But, for the most part, I just don't think she does the greatest job in communicating the relevant information to the audience. And for me, that's really my only problem with it.
Yeah, I agree, honestly. And it's so sad that we have to have this conversation over and over again because again, I just don't think she's being set up for success. Now I see someone in the live chat saying, I think it's a minority of trolls. I don't, honestly. I don't think that's the case. And I could be wrong, right? Maybe it is just the minority that thinks that. I don't know. I don't know, man. I think it's been quite some time now that a lot of people have been asking for her to be replaced. And look, this is nothing like I don't expect anyone to be to the level of Flowers, for example, right? Like no one expects that. But there does need to be a certain level that you have to be able to cast the LCS. I don't think it's there, quite personally. So that's the biggest issue I have with it. And I just I hate that the only way it seems for the LCS to listen is to have a bunch of people flame the Tigris, and that just seems to be like we're coming to the conclusion in the wrong ways. I think that people at the LCS should be able to recognize that she's not ready for it.
I think the other thing that is important to note in this conversation is the departures that we had from the broadcast team from last year as opposed to this year. We lost two of the, play-by-play casters that have been a regular appearance on the LCS in Freak and Pastry Time. These are guys that have been synonymous within the LCS for what Freak has been here since the beginning of League, and I think Pastry Time has been in North America since season 5 or season 6 if I remember. So these are two casters who've been ingrained into the LCS and are within the LCS for the last 6+ years, and for them to suddenly be gone, I think the LCS is finding it a little bit difficult to bring back people to acquire people who are at that level. Obviously, nobody is going to be at the level of a proficient caster who's been casting the game for 10+ years, but we're seeing a lot of these newer faces within the LCS, and while it will take time for them to improve their casting and to get better, time is the only answer here. So, you know,
Yeah. It It feels dogpiley to have this conversation, but when there's a Reddit post that gets like 4 or 5,000 upvotes, I don't think we can ignore the elephant in the room anymore, and it sucks that we have to have this conversation. It, yeah, feels awful.
Mhm.
What's next, J&T?
Well, we got round 2 of the playoffs coming up. Obviously, we have in the upper bracket Cloud9 versus FlyQuest, and in the lower bracket we have Golden Guardians versus Evil Geniuses. But quickly before we jump into previewing those series, obviously the most important thing about winners, the upper bracket, that'll be important to note, is winner goes to finals. And what does that mean?
True.
That means whoever wins that series is going to MSI. So we'll throw this out right now. Blue Jay, who are your predictions for which 2 teams are going to MSI this split? Because one of them will, no matter what, be Cloud9 FlyQuest, and the other representative will be of those 3 teams in the lower bracket.
I'm trying so hard to not get too hyped on EG as I sit here wearing the EG jersey. I think it's EG and C9. I
Okay?
uh I mean, look, I think everyone is in agreement that we have to say C9. They've looked like the best team for most of the split. Early on, FlyQuest looked like the best, but as far as what we've seen since like midway through the split, C9 has been clearly the best team, right? We've seen FlyQuest hiccup a little bit, and we saw EG hiccup a little bit. I think most people are going to be torn between Fly and EG, and
No love for
maybe
Golden Guardians? Not a chance?
no, not a chance.
Okay, good.
Um, I gave up on Golden Guardians. I think either last week or the week before. I stopped calling them a contender. I mean, you know what? Maybe Golden Guardians can surprise us, but no, it's not them. I'm gonna go EGC9.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. It feels like my brain wants to, or sorry, my heart thinks EG, but my brain wants to say FlyQuest just based on sort of the recent performance. But I sometimes hate using this as a metric, but when you look at the 2 peaks of the teams, even though FlyQuest was ahead of EG for the majority of the regular season, for whatever reason, it still feels like EG would be better at their peak. I don't know why I am saying that, but I am saying that.
I think
So
you're saying it because of last year, right? Like, how can we just forget that EG looked pretty damn good starting from spring playoffs last year onto the end of the season? Even with Danny having the Danny issues, they were still able to make it to Worlds despite having a sub. Or no, I guess they did. Never mind, because
they made
they
world, yeah.
qualified
Once they
before.
qualified, Cowrie came
But
in.
no, even still though, even still, because we know Danny was not himself during that time, as we later learned, sadly. So even still, even with Danny dealing with the issues that he was dealing with, they still qualified for Worlds, which to me is even more difficult to do than with a sub. So I think that's why. I think it's just because we know the players on these team on this team is so good, and when we see them come out in 3-0 today, it's kind of hard to doubt them.
Yeah, I'm in the EG. I'm on the EG train as well. I think it'll be Cloud9 and EG. However, I do think that, I mean, I'm pretty 50-50 on FlyQuest and EG. Um, I guess we should get into our preview of these series and obviously our predictions. Beginning with Cloud9 versus FlyQuest. This one, I don't know. I was about to say that it feels obvious, but maybe that's because I'm a little Cloud9 biased as always.
I don't necessarily like the matchup for FlyQuest. I think that, especially with FlyQuest not exactly getting that many early game leads and mostly relying on team fighting, I think it's going to be really difficult for them to team fight with a team that gets a lot of advantages like Cloud9 gets in the early games. We talk all the time about how Cloud9 is super aggressive and they just manage to choke out the other team before they get the chance to scale. I fear that that's what's going to happen in this series. Now, mind you, we did see a new version of FlyQuest against 100 Thieves, right? We saw them play through other lanes. We saw them be a little bit more active. So there is a world where FlyQuest takes this series. I just think it's unlikely. I'm gonna go Cloud9 3-1.
Wow, I was about to just say Cloud9 3-0, but would that actually? You know what? My balls are out. It's Cloud9 3-0. But the one, I guess the one dynamic that I am a bit worried about is actually the jungle with Blabber, because we saw a very different version of Blabber in the CLG series than we have pretty much the Blabber that we've been watching for the last 4 years, it feels like. And a lot of that has to do with the increased jungle bans that we're seeing in the draft, especially since the beginning of playoffs, where, like I mentioned, Wukong is now the shiny new toy of, if you're on blue side and you have first pick and Wukong is available, you need to slam Wukong or you're basically trolling at this point, because We're seeing a lot of Lee Sin bans, Viego bans, Sejuani bans, Elise bans, Vi bans, almost every single playoff game. I went back to check before we went live. There is at a minimum 3 jungle bans in the first phase of every single draft. I only skimmed it right at the end, but I'm pretty confident there was maybe one game exception. There is 3 to 4 jungle bans every single game, and we saw Blabber kind of put on the Maokai duty in the CLG series. A bit confused why that pick was popping up in the first place. I know it was like kind of the old king of jungle in the previous meta. We saw it a bunch at Worlds. We saw it a little bit towards the beginning of the split, but really fell out of favor in terms of a lot of other things. But I think when you can push Blabber onto an uncomfortable pick, it does make it a bit difficult for Cloud9 to operate. Because we outlined it during the series versus CLG. The way that Cloud9 likes to operate is winning lanes, let Blabber do what he wants, and he'll take over. But when he gets pushed back on that, it can sometimes go off the rails for Cloud9. So if I was FlyQuest going into the series, implement a similar game plan that CLG did when it comes to the draft. Try to force Blabber onto some form of an unconventional pick. But as we've seen in the past, sometimes Blabber just whips out these random picks that we've never seen before or aren't in meta and just completely dominates on them. One of them is like Nocturne. He just randomly sometimes likes to whip out Nocturne and shit on everybody. So
Hmm.
while I can say right now, like that's a strategy that FlyQuest should implement because it worked when CLG did it, but sometimes Blabber just has these picks to nullify that whole plan.
Yeah. So a couple of things. You mentioned the Wukong. I don't think Wukong gets through, honestly.
It shouldn't.
I don't think
Neither team should give up Wukong to either
the
player.
thing is, I don't think C9 needs it, and I think that FlyQuest looked really, really good with it. I think it'll be C9 banning it if I had to guess, because you mentioned how Blabber has all these other picks. It's not to say that Spica can't play anything else either, but I just think the Wukong is more valuable to FlyQuest than it is to C9. So I think C9 is going to end up banning that out. The other issue that I have with this matchup is I do give C9 the edge in every role. Even if FlyQuest is solid in the top lane with Impact, they're solid in jungle with Spica. Vikla had a great weekend. Vikla's looking good. Their bot lane is good. I just think C9's better in all of those roles. So that's kind of the other issue that I'm having with predicting FlyQuest is I think C9's got the edge everywhere. Even if it's slight edge, an edge nonetheless.
Yeah, I guess the only place where I wouldn't give Cloud9 the edge is
Mid
top
lane?
lane, but
Oh, I thought
the
you were gonna say
only
mid.
but I mean the only way that I'm saying that is if we see, a normal top lane state. Because I've said this since the existence of this podcast, Impact is the biggest neutralizer, in the LCS when it comes to his job is not to win or lose the lane, it's to go even and do more throughout the game, whether that, is getting ahead in lane, affecting the map elsewhere, whatever. So if we do see, a top lane centric Cloud9, which is kind of what we saw towards the beginning of the split, where we're seeing power picks on Fudge, getting the counter matchup, Blabber visiting up there early and often, then yes, Cloud9 is obviously going to have the advantage through top and can play through top. But if we're seeing tank versus tank in the top lane, that's Impact all day for me. So it will be
That is
very
fair.
interesting.
That is fair. And you're right to say that Impact is the neutralizer. I will say Fudge was our best top, and I don't think it's close. That's a tough neutralization there, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so you're right.
I want to,
You're right that Impact is the neutralizer. Neutralizing Fudge, I think, is the tallest task that you could have in the top lane in this league.
I just want to jog my memory a bit just to pull up the matches that they played in the regular season just to see what they looked like.
That would have
Just in terms
been
of
well,
top
one.
lane. Well, yeah, I
Yeah,
remember how
one
the
was.
games played out just in terms of top lane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember one was with Diplex. I think that was an Amumu game, if I remember right.
Yeah, no,
Amumu for Spica.
that's another thing that makes it hard to evaluate the matchup between these two teams is because both times when they played in the regular season, it was just one team snowballing on the other team, so we really got we have no information on how an even game state would theoretically play out or how late game team fights would play out because there was none of that. Both teams exploded the game through mid jungle early, and that's how they won the game. I did look it up. Both of the games, Fudge was playing Fiora into Impact's Cassante.
Hmm.
He got rolled in the first one and won the second one. This Fudge did. So, like I said, top lane will be a very interesting lane to watch because I think if Cloud9 does decide to play through top side and put Fudge on the counter picks and have Blabber go up there, Cloud9 can and will smash the game through top. But tank versus tank, I like that for the FlyQuest and Impact side of things.
I think it's a good thing that we don't really know what to expect. That the two games were polar opposites going into a best of five. I think that makes it more exciting as far as the maybe difficult to predict, but more exciting from the fan point of view.
Mm.
Let's talk about Golden Guardians and Evil Geniuses. Actually, before we do, just a reminder those in the live chat to hit the follow button. We do episodes live every Sunday night at 7 o'clock East Coast and 4 o'clock West Coast. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit the follow button, and we'll see you on the weekly on Sunday evenings. Okay, other series, JNT. Let's preview.
I feel like it's going to be a pretty similar preview to my Cloud9 versus FlyQuest series because I'm going 3-0 for EG. And I mean, maybe we're both just Golden Guardian haters. We kind of called them frauds last week when they fumbled the bag in the Super Week, but I don't know.
I mean, I agree. I don't know what to say. Like, I didn't think that their series against 100 Thieves was even all that convincing. Don't get me wrong. There were some good things sprinkled throughout the series. I just don't think, I don't know if any of their games were like solid from start to finish. I'm trying to remember.
Game 2.
Maybe oh yeah, the
Game
first
2.
Nami Lucian game,
Yeah.
right? The
But,
first
I
one.
mean, that was it, really.
And we kind of mentioned how like we think 100 Thieves kind of fumbled allowing them to do what they did. But I guess you know what? No, it was still a clean game. So maybe I'm not giving enough credit to Golden Guardians, but
But is it still going to be 3-0, or are you going to predict
yes.
something? Okay,
Yeah,
well, oh, there we go.
I'm still going 3-0 EG. It's so like I feel like a fraud because all like EG been running it down the whole split. Like they didn't look like themselves. They come back for one best of three. They 3-0 in all close games, to be honest. Like all these games could have kind of gone either way. They 3-0, and I'm just like, yep, they're back. No problem. 3-0. See you in finals. But I mean, yeah, I'm still giving them the 3-0.
You are wearing the EG jersey, so
Yes. I wore the EG jersey specifically because I thought they were back. I could have worn the FlyQuest jersey. I think I wore a C9 one last week. I couldn't wear the C9 jersey. I'm buying the EG hype, which my God, have I been wrong before? I've bought the EG hype like 3 times this split.
well, yeah. The
But I'm
basis
buying it again.
the basis for the hype is warranted, but we can be a bit nervous, especially when it comes to JoJo.
Yeah.
Mid
And I
lane though,
guess
that actually will be a good matchup. I think Gory when Golden Guardians was succeeding, it was very gory oriented. Stuff like LeBlanc, stuff like Yone. That's a lot of the stuff that we were seeing during their 7-game win streak. Struggled towards the end, but I think if there is a way for Golden Guardians to win, it will be through the mid lane. Get something advantageous for Gory. Don't let JoJo get his hands on the Ari. I think that should be a perma ban or perma pick from Golden Guardians side. I really would not give over that pick if I was GG.
in first team All Pro Gory going up against JoJo was probably first team All Pro last like summer split.
I think that's pretty safe to assume.
I think he was.
I
I
don't
don't
I don't know
remember.
who else you would have put.
Yeah.
Because from what I can recall,
Anyway.
Jensen and Bjerg weren't like that fantastic.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's a good matchup. That should be exciting. Trying to think of where Golden Guardians can really outplay them.
Apart from what I just
Yeah,
said.
just mid. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. And the thing
Okay,
is,
just mid. Never mind then.
we might not even see it mid. I think Golden Guardians bot lane is outclassed. I think their jungle is outclassed, and I think their top is incredibly outclassed. Sorry, Licorice.
We barely opened that can of worms, the Licorice. I mean, we talked about him a little bit, but
Nah, we don't need to open that can of worms. If you
gotcha.
want to hear me talk about Licorice, I don't want to flame Licorice again. You can listen to our past episodes and you can hear me flame about Licorice. I don't want to be flaming no more.
Well, you did mention that Gory finished first team All Pro, and we want to go through those. But first team All Pro on the screen right now. I'll read it out for the audio only people. Top lane Fudge, jungle Blabber, mid lane Gory, bot lane Berserker, and Vulcan. So I think a lot of us were expecting the majority of this first team All Pro, except for the mid lane. Did you have him first, actually?
I had him first. I wasn't expecting the bot lane.
Oh,
I was pretty darn clear that I thought that the Berserker thing was recency bias. As the thing is, I'm not upset by this whatsoever. I realize because of this, Berserker's probably going to win MVP, and I disagree with it, but I'm not like triggered by it because you know what? He's really freaking good. I
yeah.
just think that there's so much recency bias when it comes to this specific thing because of the Draven game, which, by the way, I even said last week, I think that was one of the most 1v9 performances we saw all split long. I think people are really forgetting just how good Prince was to start the year. So to me, I think it was very clear that it was Prince first all pro team, but I'm not like upset by Berserker getting it. Like he's good.
Yeah, I feel a little bit bad bringing this up, taking away from Gory's first team All Pro, but I did listen to the dive this week when they were discussing their reasonings for their All Pro voting, and pretty
Hmm.
much, and the people who were on the dive, it was Mark,
Raz,
Jazz,
Emily, and Jat.
yes, it was those four, and they pretty much all said that MNS would have been their first team All Pro mid, but they did take away, hypothetical points for him not playing the entire split. So I didn't in my case. I mean, I took into account a little bit, but I just felt that his dominance was more important than the games that he missed. So to me, not surprising that Gory was there for CMall Pro. I did have him as third on my list. I had a MNS Palafox, then Gory, but very deserving of the first team spot. I think Gory was pretty much the lone shining star on Golden Guardians over the course of the entire split. Obviously, their bot lane was playing well, for
I
a
still
good
can't
portion of the
believe,
season.
like, sorry, I just disagree with you so much when it comes to the MNS thing. Like, I agree with the dive people. Like, you need to play more than half the split to warrant first, especially if you run it down 3 of those 9 games. Like, don't get me wrong, 6 of the 9, absolute poggers, but like he sprinted it in 3 of them,
Well,
man.
10
If you're
because the tiebreaker.
Yeah, in 10, fair enough. But still though, like that to me, I can't get behind that whatsoever. So I put MNS number 2 and I wasn't even happy with myself doing that.
Anyways, moving on to the second All Pro team. This was Impact, Spica, MNS, Prince, and Sven. Pretty much no surprises here whatsoever. I think the both of us had Impact to Spica to uh,
No, I thought we
no.
had both had inspired. I had inspired too.
Oh, yeah, you're right. We both had Spica third.
Yeah,
Um,
which that's another one that didn't trigger me. Like I thought Spica had a great split. I thought Inspired also had a great split, but his mid laner was running it down constantly. And I've heard so many times on the dive, for example, and other places where like they'll be like, "Well, you got to remember like who they're playing with," and like it just seems like we all forgot that Inspired was playing it with a mid laner who was running it down for half of the split. I don't know what
led
happened
the
there.
league in deaths. Like
Like, yeah. So I don't know. To me, I still think Inspired had the better split. I just thought his mid laner was much, much worse. Am I bothered by Spica getting second All Pro? No. He was a great jungler. He had a great split. A big bounce back for Spica, by the way, from TSM last year. So I was not triggered by this whatsoever. Yeah,
mhm.
I was happy.
And then we move to the third team. Someday inspired Vikla, Doublelift, and Huhi. I mean, Doublelift is the only thing that I really have a problem with. And if we want to, I wouldn't say blame recency bias, but discuss recency bias. And one of the problems that usually comes with all pro voting is recency bias. I think having Doublelift up on there is very recency bias
Yeah, I agree.
because FBI was clearly the third best ADC in the league this year. And I say it again, clearly the third best behind Prince of
People don't
Berserker.
agree with us. I thought FBI was better than Doublelift over the split as well. But this is why you hear players all the time just say, like, I don't care. It's a popularity contest. It's because of votes like that. And like whatever, man. Like I don't get triggered by all pro voting anymore. I used to get like so opinionated on this stuff, and even I guess I'm still opinionated. I just like I don't get triggered by seeing like the guys that I don't think deserving to be on there be on there.
You get triggered,
It's
just
just
not as
like
much.
this happens all the time. Like whatever, man. I think Palafox was way better than Vikla. I thought FBI was better than Doublelift, and that's kind of it, honestly.
Yeah, Vikla was. I remember we did discuss him. I don't. Both of us had him off of our list. I think we kind of had him just behind the other front runners and MNS Gory and Palafox. But Palafox deserved to be on here. Like, come
Yeah,
on,
I think so too.
this is some noob shit. This is some third party media who probably doesn't watch all the LCS games just voting Vikla.
Palafox even said in his interview with Travis Gafford that like he's like it's a popularity contest. This kind of why, honestly. I think he realizes like I had a pretty damn good split and I should have been all pro, but whatever.
Yeah,
So I don't blame him if he's frustrated by it because like that's just what you're gonna get. Also, I forgot to mention that earlier I had Andrew do a little bit of research. Him and we were going through when the last time was a player got 100 kills. So Doublelift did this split and Prince did. Doublelift played 20 games, Prince played 19. That has not happened since Jensen did it in season 7, by the way. Summer.
that's best of
Jensen,
3 as well. So
yes. No, but hold on. Jensen got like, he averaged like 5.7 kills per game or something like that. A ridiculous amount over 45 games. in best of three. He got like 250 kills or something like that in season
Nuts.
7. So all of this to say that I thought Prince was obviously like I look kills. It's not just more kills, better player. I realize it's not that simple. I just need to highlight how crazy it was that Prince got 100 kills this split. Yes, one bonus game because of a tiebreaker, which by the way is pretty normal. There's tiebreakers all the time. Um, that has not happened in a long, long freaking time, and I think that is another uh, way to kind of contextualize just how crazy of a split Prince had, even if not so much towards the tail end. So
Mhm.
that was something else that I meant to mention with the Prince Berserker conversation.
All good. Well, presumably next week we will find out who the coaching staff of the split was, but we like to give our predictions on this podcast. And if I had to make my prediction at this very moment, I'd pick FlyQuest.
Interesting.
And I think the other what's the word I'm looking for? The other eligible candidates in this discussion are probably CLG, and if you want to throw another one in there, Golden Guardians. But if I had my pick, I picked FlyQuest, and I think a lot of that did have to do with their perception coming into the league, because I feel like people were very quick to jump on the FlyQuest bandwagon, kind of ignoring the fact that we really weren't sure what the rest of this team was going to look like, except for Prince. I think everybody knew that Prince coming into the league was going to be one of the best 80s in the league. Maybe didn't know that he was going to be as good as he was, but it felt like, a lot of people weren't necessarily sure what their bot lane pairing was going to look like. If Spica was going to be old version of Spica or the new version of Spica, the new version being, 2022 TSM. So I don't know. I just don't think that coming into the split, this team was as hyped as I feel like people made it out to be. So for them to be almost a top team in the league for the majority of the split, credit to them.
I have two candidates. So I guess we forgot to mention that like we are fully recognizing, guys, that we don't know what goes on in like scrim rooms and all that stuff. This is just our interpretation and prediction. It's not, oh, I think this team should be the coach of this play. It's more of a just prediction based off of what was expected out of the teams and how they performed. So the two names that I'm going to throw out there, one is CLG. Because of their improvement from last year to this year, I still think CLG should be thrown in for just how much better that roster is looking. The other one, and I'm really surprised to say this, TSM. They were supposed to be pure trash this team, and they just missed playoffs, which to me was way better than what we were expecting out of TSM. So I can't believe I'm saying it, but maybe TSM for coach of the split as well.
I mean, to be honest, that's not even a name I considered. Like, I didn't even consider any of the non-playoff teams, but
But you
I
could
mean,
kind of see it,
no,
right?
I mean, the logic and the argument makes complete sense. So,
Yeah. Like I think most people had TSM pegged as the ninth best team, and sure they didn't make playoffs, which is a failure in TSM eyes. But from what we were expecting out of this team, pretty good. They actually held their own for most of the split, even if they kind of crashed at the end and lost solo. Rip
yeah, I
solo.
think your metrics are valid. I just think it's hard to implement that when they didn't even make it to
Hmm.
playoffs.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't supposed to make it even near playoffs, but yeah, I
Once
still get your point.
completely fair. No, I can't argue against you except for the fact that they didn't make playoffs, so they weren't even in the conversation for me. So,
Yeah, fair enough. What else we got for quick news?
well, speaking of TSM, they always manage
Oh,
to
right.
find their way into the quick news section, whether they're creating drama or not. This one, not necessarily on the drama side of things, but TSM Regi ended up making this like Reddit post with regards to some announcement that TSM is supposed to be making. Now, I don't understand the lore behind this announcement, but apparently this I keep saying announcement by the way because that's what it was pegged as, some announcement that was supposed to happen like 4 or 5 months ago, didn't happen, and now Reggie apparently just said that this announcement was being delayed another 4 to 5 months, and he then
Oh, so
had
this
to
is the same announcement as the first one?
sure, whatever that is, whatever announcement is supposed to mean, yes, it is.
We didn't know, like, didn't he just tweet out?
Yes,
Someone
that
can
yeah,
fact
that,
check me
that
on this.
that's
He
that's what I'm
tweeted out
referring
like
to.
January or something, and
Yeah,
then like nothing
which was
happened.
3 months ago, and now he says today, or I guess not today, but a few days ago that that announcement's not happening for 4 to 5 months later. And then he did this whole like he felt like he needed to explain himself in like the Reddit comments section of the post on the TSM Reddit, and I just wanted to read it out because it's pretty interesting.
Please do.
It's with
Kind of.
regards to all of the high-ranking, employees at TSM who've left. Those people include their league general manager Glenn, their league team manager Christine, their COO Walter Wang, and their VP of Esports Operations Dominic. Um, so that's 4 high-ranking people all leaving within basically a 3-week span. And to read out this Reggie thing, it says, "We overhired and expanded too quickly. With the economic downturn, we made the necessary changes to be sustainable. This was not easy. Our current team is stronger and more performant. We don't see negative effects with these changes that we've made. TSM was not headed in the right direction. I am taking a more hands-on role," whatever that's
Nunca.
supposed to mean.
That is not a good sign, ladies and gentlemen. Okay,
"In fact,
continue.
we've put the right decision makers in place to be more successful long term."
What
Um,
does that
and then with
mean,
regards to
man?
this announcement, he says, "We're in the process of figuring multiple things out and will not be able to make any sort of announcement until everything is final and complete. Expect a minimum of 4 to 5 months." Just to end it right there, when he says expect a minimum of 4 to 5 months, wild prediction of my own, that's going to be like 8, 9 months down the line. So
I just don't expect anything out of TSM anymore. Like when Reggie says something, I'm not buying it. So, like, okay, maybe he says something in 4 or 5 months or whatever, but if he doesn't, I'm not surprised.
but the statement that I just read kind of goes hand in hand with Chawi also saying in an interview that TSM spent uh, presumably the least amount of money on their LCS roster that's this split. That was his words, not mine. And obviously not official or anything because I don't think any of the total value of contracts in the LCS is public available information.
Hmm.
So yeah, the fact that all these high ups from TSM are leaving, leaving, quote unquote, very, very important to note that. Plus their what's the word that I'm looking for? Their lack of funding into the LCS these days does feel like TSM is reaching a bit of an end point here, should I say?
Or just at least a low point. Maybe not an end point. I mean, maybe an end point, but
I should say
definitely a
end
low
point
point.
within the LCS potentially.
Maybe it would be so weird for TSM to leave the LCS. That doesn't mean it can't happen because we there was rumors last year about them looking into the LEC and looking into other leagues. So I'm not saying it's not going to happen. It would just be so weird to not have TSM in the LCS. And you and I, we talked all last year about whether TSM was the new CLG. We talked about it in like 6 different episodes or
They
something.
still are, so yeah.
And they're not though. Like this
they
is the thing. So let me finish. So
okay.
let me finish. The reason why I continue to say they're not the new CLG is because CLG continuously for like 4 splits in a row finished ninth or 10th. TSM has not done that. What I can say for certainty is that TSM is no longer TSM. So maybe they're not CLG, but they're not what they once were. They're not even
Hmm.
spending for an LCS roster anymore. They're going full like uh I don't know, 50 gold econ, little TFT reference there. They're just sitting as much cash as they can. They're letting go of people apparently in the company. Like this is just not the TSM that we once knew. I don't know what to expect out of this org going forward. I just don't expect to see TSM again. I think Reggie's done such a bad job of just ruining the reputation of the team already. And they don't win anymore, which was their pretty much their only brand that they had to begin with. So
I
now what?
I
Like
like
what's
how like because you are right. The whole point of TSM was that they won, and now their new thing to do is, I mean, they always talk about how they won like the Rainbow Six event, like that was their first world championship. But it feels like that is the new focus of TSM. Is anytime I see anything with regards to a person leaving TSM, somebody talking about TSM, like TSM is in the news. It's all about like they were the Rainbow Six champions. It wasn't that like
and
this
look,
is one of the
there's
biggest
no
teams in the LCS. They started out their league. They have a rich history in League of Legends. Nope, they won the Rainbow Six Siege World Championship. That's about it.
there's nothing wrong with R6. I think it's a good esport. I've gone to an event myself. I enjoyed it. It was fun. It's just like for TSM, who cares? Like
Exactly.
TSM is not supposed to be an R6 org. Like don't it's great that they have other teams and other games and all that crap. That's fine. What is going on with your League of Legends team? That's why TSM fans exist is because of your league team. What is going on, man? That's what matters. Like R6,
How
who cares, man?
How wild is it that they let go of their general manager of their league team, who which the team was doing better than they probably expected to begin with. Like, that guy got let go. He put together a
Yeah.
good roster by all accounts compared to how they were expected to perform, and that guy got fired. Like,
Well, here I guess the question is, what were they expecting to be able to keep these people? It's probably just it's not a performance thing. It's probably just a cash thing
it most
because
likely is, especially with the way
because
that he worded his initial
with the
statements.
roster, yeah, with the roster that they put together, how could you even expect anything more than 8-10 record? Like you should be more than happy with that. I don't know. I don't know what the hell happened to TSM. I don't know if TSM is ever going to be TSM again. They're gonna just be this new version that I don't know what can we call it. There's already so many memes of TSM, right? There's free SM, there's talent suppression machine, there's all like the classic memes. Maybe we need a new one
Maybe that's what we should
that
do for next week is,
highlights this team that just doesn't try to win LCS anymore, which was like their shtick for a decade.
yeah, I mean, well, and that'll be our homework. We'll try to cook up a new TSM meme for next week. We'll
Or
think about it. We'll think
someone can
about
let
it.
us know in the comments section as well if they got a good name
Yeah.
of like a good TSM name. Also, Buster in the live chat says TSM Apex actually have an insane amount of fans. That is true. I have heard that they have fans for Apex. I have heard that. I even I guess not anymore. When Valorant first started, there was some hype around the TSM roster, and then whatever. Don't know what happened with that.
I
The
mean,
point is, it's not that there's anything wrong with these other esports. It's just not what TSM is known for. That's the problem.
and
The esport that like you grew your brand with is just being left to the side. That's the problem.
my only thing that I will say, because obviously when we discuss TSM on this podcast, we are talking about it majority of the cases from a pure league standpoint. And yes, obviously TSM, they're an org that is successful in other esports titles. But one thing that is very common with TSM in other esport titles that aren't league and Smash basically is they have this like 2 to 3 year time window where they're at the top and then they're just out and they never come back. Like, feel like there's so many examples to bring up. There's TSM CS:GO, like they dropped off the face of the earth in like 2015 when the roster got bought up by Misfits. There was like TSM Fortnite when Fortnite was popping off with like Myth and Daquan and those fools, and they dropped off the face except for Myth. All the rest of them dropped off the face of the earth. There was TSM Valorant, who was successful in the first 6 months of the game and then turned into complete dogshit trash. What other stuff is there?
I don't know.
I mean, they still have Leffen, I guess, who's a melee player, but they lost like that Tweak guy who was like apparently a really good Smash Ultimate player. I know nothing about Smash Ultimate, but I have a few friends who play that game, and they say that guy Tweak is insane, and he's no longer on TSM. So I don't know. It's my only point of bringing this up is the data would suggest that TSM might not be in Apex Legends for the foreseeable future. That might have an expiration date on it. And same with Rainbow Six Siege.
Gotcha.
This is pure speculation and guesswork, but if you look at the past, they seem to get invested big when it's going well, and when it doesn't go well, they get the fuck out of there. So if TSM continues to sit at the bottom of the standings in the LCS for a summer split, next spring split, next summer, like they're going to be out of here. They are not going to stick around if it's not going well. I'll tell you right now.
Well, and remember, Reggie's gonna be more hands-on or whatever that means. Is that what he
Okay,
said? Hands-on?
I'll throw Reggie one singular bone right here because
Uh-huh.
as if you watch this podcast early on, you'll know I was a active TSM Legends watcher, and the only reason was because I loved watching TSM Legends after they lost. And the one thing that I'll say is, especially early on in the TSM Legends days, whenever Reggie said he's going more quote unquote hands on, the team and the org did play better and they performed better. So maybe it's a good
Yeah,
thing.
that's when they had Bjergsen
Oh, just saying.
and double lift and and good
Maybe it was Reggie.
players.
Who knows? Maybe it was Reggie. We don't know.
Yeah, it was probably Reggie that made Bjergsen be the goat and double lift be the other goat, and yeah. Okay,
Did you ever see
we can
Bjergsen and Reginald on stage at the same time? I'm pretty sure Reggie was dressing up as Bjergsen and playing on stage. Like,
we can end this XD discussion unless you have anything else on it. I'm done.
nah, I guess the last thing that I'd say is I agree with Big Buster Boy in the chat. I've never liked Reggie anyway. Exactly. I feel like
Same.
everybody has that same sentiment.
Pretty
Moving
much.
on. Ablaze Olive, he recently announced on Twitter that he was retiring from competitive league. I guess important to note that he didn't necessarily rule out coaching, but as a player, he's done so.
Yeah, this was sad to me because look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He did not have a good split this year. He didn't have a good start. Last year he had a pretty bad year, but I was still such a fan. We were both fans of him since he joined the league in his first year with Golden Guardians.
2021 summer, Ablaze Olive. He was peaking so hard, man.
He should have been an all pro, third all pro. Okay, here's the thing though. The sad part is it's like I just didn't want his career to end this way. To end with like a rough split and mental health issues and having to step away from the game for his own health. That's just not how you want to see any player have to retire and hang it up, so to speak. So I guess it's just a little sad and we wish Olive nothing but the best.
Yeah. See you. Hopefully, he coaches. I mean, we're seeing a lot of players these days turn into coaches. So
I think Olive would be, first of all, a great coach. I think he'd be good on broadcast too. I think he's always been like he doesn't go on broadcast all that much, but whenever he did like interviews and stuff like that, he was always like really vocal, really well spoken. I think he would do great in that kind of environment. So I'm kind of hoping that we see Olive join the LCS broadcast in one way or another.
And then last up, we have LS announced, I think it was yesterday, being Saturday, that he's joining FlyQuest as content creator, which
Yeah, that
is
was kind of cool.
pretty cool. Um, Obviously, I think he's been contracted with T1 for the last 2.5 years now, I think since summer 2020, he's been a T1 content creator. So interesting to see him make the switch. Um, I can't recall if he was even streaming under T1 like as of a week or two ago when he still would have been doing LCK co streams and stuff. But either way, a good way for FlyQuest to improve their presence within League and the LCS, especially considering their team looks like they're going to be here to stay for a little bit at the top. So, yeah, good for them.
Yeah, it doesn't seem it like there's a lot of a lot of companies that are like taking their foot off the gas. It doesn't seem like FlyQuest is one of them though. So that's kind of cool. It doesn't
Oh,
seem like they're too
they
afraid of
they
taking a loss or
they seem
whatever.
to be doing the opposite. They're going all in. Like
Yeah.
get the big boy Papa Smithy, puts together a very solid roster, bring over some god tier LCK imports and prints. Vikla was pretty good.
Oh
Um,
my god, I just saw the thumbnail for this episode.
is it
Wait
good?
till you guys see it on YouTube. It's hilarious.
Mm,
You guys, I guess it's a good time to plug going over to our YouTube to subscribe there. Episode should be up in usually it's on YouTube like an hour or two after or we're done this episode. It's a good thumbnail. Shout out to Luis. You're the best, buddy.
mhm.
That's it for this episode, right, Jinter? There was nothing
I
else.
think that's it. Unless I
Okay,
forgot to write something down.
just a reminder to those that are still hanging out in the live chat or even just the lurkers, remember to hit the follow button. And I will remind you again that we do this live every week on Sundays. So hit the follow button, or you could follow me on Twitter at bluej_GG. I always tweet out before we go live. If you want to catch the live episodes, we love people that are interacting in the live chat. And at that point, I may as well make the point of thanking people interacting in the live chat. We appreciate your discussion, your opinions, and all that stuff. It really does add to the podcast, and sometimes it kind of jogs our memory of something that happened or just makes us think of a point that we might be missing. So we appreciate you guys hanging out in the live chat. And what else, Genter? Anything else that we should plug? Oh, we should thank Travis. Thank you, Travis, again for the raid. Much appreciated. Anything else, Genter?
Um, oh, come to the live chat. You can flame us if we're wrong. So there you go.
Yeah,
I mean, if
we want to hear
I
from you
get
guys.
something wrong, you can aggressively type in the chat. No, JNT, that was wrong. It was actually this. Because people do that on the reg, and I thank those people who do that because I don't want to be saying the wrong things out here. Lamau LP, he's on the reg. He sometimes will correct me. So
Yeah, true.
especially when it comes to
All right,
my Eastern League knowledge, which isn't always the best.
I'm gonna flame you guys when Fly beats C9. Okay, Big Buster Boy. We'll
That's
see
fair.
you next week then. I want to see you next week. And well, should we flame him back if C9 wins?
Yes,
Hmm.
that's what this agreement entails.
Okay, we'll do it. All right. Thanks you guys. Thanks guys for joining us. This has been episode 119 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. We'll see you guys next week.